All right. So this is the first time that I'm doing a podcast from a place far away, and this kind of technical glitches never happen. So excuse my fumbling and everything. My English is not as good, but I'll try my best. So how are you, man? How have you been? What's happening after you return? What did you do after 14 weeks?
So I'm actually
after returning.
Well, so I had a crazy 2-week period with NIMS, where we had the world premiere in New York, and then we came back and had the European premiere in the UK. Then obviously we came to Kathmandu for the Nepali premiere. So that was a kind of wild 2 weeks, because NIMS, he likes to work hard, but he likes to play hard. So it was a long 2 weeks. But no, since then I'm filming at the moment. I'm working on a Formula One documentary. So I'm straight into.
That's Steve McQueen, or you did some work with Steve McQueen, right? The man and May Lanes.
So I was involved, but I only had a very small role. So Steve McQueen, The Man and the Mom, was a film that my co-founders at Noah Media Group, Gabriel Clark and John McKenna, they directed that film in 2015. So, but the film I'm working on at the moment is a story about 2 Ferrari drivers, which is due for release at the end of next year.
Wow. So first of all, I would like to thank you for portraying the story of NIMS so beautifully. On behalf of all the Nepalese here, we're really proud of him. And I would have really wanted you to have a very I would have wanted to have a good time with you, like one-on-one, but we were too busy partying at the moment. Like you said, NIMS likes to party hard, and I just called you on the last day, but you were about to leave, so that never happened. But thank you for the time again.
Great.
And it was so beautifully put. I just want to thank you, and I would like to congratulate you. And the response here in Nepal is unbelievable. The most famous pages, the most famous Instagram pages, everyone's sharing it. Everyone's loved it so far. But one thing that has been missing is the documentary is not available in Nepali, right? So a lot of people don't understand English here. So that has kind of been a gap. But those who have watched it, I've actually changed my life. I've actually started to wake up like really early, work out and everything. And I think the documentary gave a really good drive because it was all shot here in Nepal. He had the equal opportunities as all of us. So it really impressed us. So how was it like? How was the experience? How much time did it take for you to get convinced to do it? Or what made you do it?
Well, I took no convincing to do it. So I first met NIMS in 2019. So I think he was about halfway through the project. He'd completed the first phase in Nepal, where he'd climbed 6 mountains in 31 days. So he'd made an incredible big start to Project Possible. And then I met him. He was back in the UK trying to raise further money to pay for the second phase, which was the Pakistan phase of Project Possible. So I met him via a friend of ours, a mutual friend, and NIMS was very much looking for funding because he'd struggled massively since he left the Special Forces in the UK. He'd sacrificed his pension. He'd obviously sacrificed his income. And because he had no social media profile at all, because he was in the Special Forces and that wasn't allowed, he was struggling massively to persuade investors and persuade sponsors to back Project Possible, because he had no track record in mountaineering at all. Apart from these climbs that he'd done, whenever he had time off from the military, which he couldn't really publicize about anyway. So I met NIMS, and he just started to talk about it was only the first 3 mountains that he climbed, which were Annapurna, Dhaulagiri and Kanchenjunga. And, he started to talk about them, and, he's talked about the rescue that took place on Annapurna. He talked about the storm that he and the team had got caught up in Dhaulagiri, and, the fact that they'd left for the summit push at 6 in the evening and at 9 in the evening and hadn't summited until 6 p.m. the next day. So they'd climbed through a storm for 21 hours straight. And I just couldn't get my head around that, doing something for 21 hours.
That's already a story on its own.
Yeah. So even walking for 21 hours straight is really difficult. Climbing up an 8,000er through a storm. So I couldn't really get my head around that. And then he talked about what happened at Kanchenjunga with the rescue, and with the fact that he struggled with haze, and he just managed to get back down the mountain. That was only 3 out of the 14. So at that stage, I just thought, there's no way he's going to do all 14. It's just insane. But he was looking for funding at the time, which we couldn't, which we and I couldn't help with personally. But it was just as we were leaving this meeting, I asked him whether he was filming any of it. And he said, yeah, I'm filming it all with my team. We're filming at altitudes that we believe haven't been shot at extensively before. We're talking about 8,000 meters plus. But more than that, we're filming all the time. So even when we're in the storms, even when we're taking part in these rescues, we're filming it all. So I thought, wow, that's incredible. So we left on good terms, and I think we, as a kind of on a personal human level, got on very well. And then I kind of got back in touch with him after he'd completed Project Possible. And he very kindly invited me down to his house in the south of England and we just spent a day where he just showed me some of the footage that he'd filmed. And I was just blown away by it for many reasons, It was incredibly cinematic, what him and his team had shot. It was epic in scale. They'd filmed on all 14 mountains. The footage was very, there was great variety in the footage. And I think Nims is such a smart guy. I think he realised straight away that if he and his team had just filmed these kind of generic mountaineering shots of the guys climbing up the mountains, that's fine, and it could become a very good mountaineering film easily, because the footage is very strong. But if this was going to really break out and become bigger than a mountaineering film and become this kind of global story, this universal story, then it had to have more layers than that. So what really struck me is not only did Nims film on the mountains, but he also filmed himself during the fundraising process in the UK, and he also filmed himself between the 3 phases, between the mountains, when he was back in Kathmandu, back in Chitwan, going around Nepal, especially spending time with his family and with his mother, who was struggling with her health massively at the time. And he was capturing these very personal, intimate scenes with his mother that really added a kind of emotional layer to the story immediately. So that's what really struck me was I think Nims realised from the very beginning that he wanted to tell this kind of global story, this inspiring story. But to do that, it needed to have variety, and it couldn't just be mountaineering shots. So that's how I really got involved. Is I saw that footage, and then we started to talk about it further, about how we could structure a film. It was basically my job then to persuade Nims to go with me as director. And I basically outlined to him how I would tell the story, which was almost like a 3-tiered narrative of, we would tell the story of the 14 mountains, and that would be the kind of base layer of the story. And then interwoven with that narrative would be his life story. So going back to his early life, going back to his time in the Gurkhas, to the time in the Special Forces, to his time back in the UK just before Project Possible started, while he was fundraising. So those 2 narratives would be interwoven, and then on top of that, we would have these kind of, what I guess you'd call universal themes, these documentary themes that would be developed throughout the story, which were human endeavour, pushing the human body to its absolute limit physically and mentally, the relationship with his family and with his mother, and then this very kind of powerful theme that Nims was very passionate about from the beginning, which was trying to uplift the name of the Nepali climbers, the Nepali Sherpas, and really celebrate the Nepali climbers and what mountaineering is, what it represents for Nepal, and the role that Nepal has played in the history of mountaineering. So I took no convincing to be part of it. I persuaded Nims to let me be part of it.
Yeah, and he's such a character, right? So what was it like going to his house? Like, what did you guys talk about? Like, when you saw the thing, was he expecting you to direct it, or like, I'm pretty sure he wanted it to be big, because I personally wanted to do something about the footage, right? So what made you, what particular scene or the whole thing, like how did it work out going into his house?
The first thing that struck me was Nims lives in a town on the south, in the south of England. There's a big Gurkha community, which is and his military base was down there. But when you go to his street, it's the most kind of normal suburban, flattest street that you could ever get. So there's no...
You won't expect a Nims out of there.
When you go there, you do not expect to when you knock on his door, you don't expect the world's most famous mountaineer to open the door. So that was that was the most extraordinary thing. But yeah, I think, he only showed me a small amount of footage, but and it, to be honest, a lot of it was around the rescue on Annapurna, which immediately, for me, you could just by seeing the rushes, you could see that there was a very, very dramatic and cinematic sequence that could be built. So I think that, and there were other parties that I know Nims was speaking to that wanted to make the film, and to be honest, there were other parties involved that were much bigger global partners potentially.
Oh, really?
But yeah, but I think Nims, you know Nims as well. I think he's very straight with people. He's very genuine. He's very authentic, and I think when I pitched to him my idea for the film, there was no kind of, we were very straight with each other. I just simply said, this is how we would do it. I will give it everything. I'll give it the next, 2 years of my life. I'll dedicate myself completely to it. And this will be a complete priority for us to make this the best possible film it can be. And if you go with us, there's also a route, we believe, where we can make this a global release, a universal release that will appeal to a much bigger audience than a mountaineering audience. And I think those things connected with Nims. And I think we hit it off on a personal level, and I think there was a trust there straight away that kind of carried through the whole production, really, because Nims and his teams filmed it, but then as soon as he came back and I started working on the film, of course Nims was straight away, he's off to climb Everest again. He's off to climb K2 in winter. He's off doing these expeditions. So he pretty much left me with the footage to then piece together the film, to do the interviews with Reinhold Mester and Jimmy Chin and Gary Madison and the team as well. So he had a lot. He gave me a lot of room and a lot of space to pull it together how I thought that the film should be told. And then really he didn't see anything until we had a very good cut of the film that was much later that year. That was the first time really he saw anything at all. So I think he had that trust in me very early on, which I was really grateful for.
Like, did he know about you before? Like, had someone put in a word for you, or like, how do you think? Like, I know he doesn't take a lot of time to make decisions, right? That we all know, but maybe it's his instinct. But how was he convinced? What do you think made him convinced, like, depend on you with so much of footage?
Well, the thing is, my background was in sport TV and sport film, and I know for a fact, because he has no interest in football or cricket or rugby or, so I know that he hadn't seen any of my previous work, so I know it wasn't that. I think what it was is we had a meeting with him in London after I'd seen the footage. And I think it was just a passion. I talked about how we could structure the film and how big the film could become if we did it in a certain way. And I think it was just a passion, really, because I was sat opposite a table with him. He was looking me directly in the eye, and I was just talking to him one-on-one. But I think, to be honest, I think he had much bigger potential offers from bigger partners. But I think it was just a passion with which I was conveying how I would go about it. And I think the dedication that I would put in, because, he sacrificed so much, and he and his team, risked their lives on so many occasions to film the story, that, I think it was just me conveying how I would give it everything as well to pull the story together.
Would you say this is your most time invested in a project, or by far one of your, like, maybe this is your best project ever? How would you like to describe 14 Peaks for you as a work portfolio?
Oh yeah, for me it's the biggest project I've worked on in my career. So I met Nims. Yeah, so I started. My first day of filming with Nims was right at the end of 2019, and then the film was released, at the end of November 2021. So I spent 2 years on the film, full time, every day, in some capacity. And because the team had shot so much footage, it was crucial. They shot I think it was probably about 150 hours of footage. But you know what it's like.
150 hours. All right.
Yeah, and you know what it's like as a filmmaker. It's like you never know where the golden moments or those gems are going to be. It could be one line of dialogue here, or it could be one amazing, incredible image here. So you have to watch all of that footage in real time to make sure that you don't miss anything. And I didn't want to leave it to an assistant editor or to an assistant producer or a researcher to go for all the footage. So I needed to make sure that I looked at every single frame. So that in itself probably took 4, 5, 6 months just to do that.
Just to look at the footage and select it.
Go through the footage, select it, and one of the challenges of the film was, Nims filmed extensively on some mountains, and then other mountains there was far less footage, purely for logistical or timings reasons. So then it became a case of, right, we can't, if this is a 90-minute, 100-minute film, you can't just sit down and say, right, well, we've got 14 mountains, we'll spend 5 minutes on each mountain. There are stories on mountains that, for example, Annapurna, where anything less than 15 to 20 minutes, you're not going to be able to tell that story. So it really becomes a structural challenge of how to tell that story. So a huge amount of work had to go into what was the structure, what were the kind of key chapters before we even got into the edit, And I was helped in that regard by my co-writer on the film, Gabriel Clark, who I've worked with on many projects before, and who's he's incredible when it comes to structuring films and the editorial oversight of narratives and developing documentary themes. So I did a lot of work with him before we even got into the edit.
I actually did some research, and I found that I know that you have a lot of patience because you're interested in Test cricket. And when we were really young, Nepal is struggling, but it's somewhere in cricket. It plays 2020 and everything. But when we were really small, we used to know all the cricketers because cricket was such a big thing back then, right? Yeah. As UFC or any other sport is right now. And since you've edited, you related to Test cricket. Like it really shows that you've got immense amount of patience. And it all made sense. Okay, you can watch so much of footage. Yeah. And then I looked back at the first project you did as a producer. Maybe that was England on Top of the World. That's a Test cricket movie, right?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call it a movie, but yeah. So I worked on Test cricket from 2006 to 2012.
Wow.
So I worked on 7 English summer seasons. But we were working on the live broadcast. So I was basically I was producing and editing a cricket highlight show that would go out every evening in the UK. So you would be at the games, and the game would happen from,
and pull out the best parts.
Yeah, so it happened from 11 a.m. to 6:30 or 7 p.m. and the show would go out at 7 p.m. So you had to work out as you were going. The show was only an hour long, so you had to work out as you were going throughout the day. How do you fit a day's worth of Test cricket into 1 hour? So that was, funny enough, it's a skill that has come in, incredibly. It's an incredibly useful skill that has come into working on the documentaries. Really is.
I always wondered what kind of people are like. It's really fast, like as soon as during the breaks or everything. Did you used to like give footage during the breaks or like immediate highlights? Is that what you used to do as well? Like as soon as wicket goes off, you give them the highlights, or
no? So we weren't on the live Sky coverage. We were doing it for a UK terrestrial broadcaster. So we basically had a show that would go out in the evening. But very often what you would have is if there was any kind of rain delay, which happens all the time in the UK, is the play would continue on until 7 o'clock or 7:30. So you'd have scenarios quite a lot where you'd be editing a highlight show while the game is still going on, and you've only got say 15 minutes to cut 10 minutes worth of footage. So you find yourself in incredibly pressurized situations where you have to make split-second decisions. But what it really comes down to is the storytelling aspect of it, and making those editorial decisions, and having a very clear sense in your mind of who the audience is, what questions the audience are going to ask, what do they need to know, what's the minimum amount of detail they need to know, where they understand what is happening, but you're not giving them too much information, and that those skills transfer into documentary, very easily, and especially in something like 14 Peaks, because it's a mountaineering film. Similar to if you make a cricket show, you're making it for a cricket audience. So a cricket audience will know the rules, they'll know the nuances of the game, but you're also trying to make it into an accessible show that bigger audiences will hopefully watch and understand. So you're constantly trying to find that balance between what level of detail do we need to convey, and how do we make this as entertaining as possible. And it was exactly the same in 14 Peaks, which was, this is a film about mountaineering on a base level. We know that mountaineers and mountaineering audiences are going to navigate to the film naturally. So we don't want to put them off by giving them information that is so basic that they already know. But on the same level, we want to attract audiences that have no idea about mountaineering. What information do we need to give them so they have an understanding of the context of what NIMS is doing, and they have an understanding of what is happening in the scenes? So one example in the film would be fixing lines. In mountaineering, everyone knows what fixing lines means. But for a non-mountaineering audience, that's something you have to explain to them. So getting that balance right is really important, and that's where working on sport has been very useful. Especially around the storytelling of sport and the editorial around sport, is you need to have a very good balance in terms of your core audience, and then that much bigger audience that you're trying to navigate towards and attract to your content.
Mm-hmm. So I did see that after that, after you worked in a few movies or documentaries. You did direct a couple. I tried my best to find these films, The American Fall and Do You Feel Lucky Punk. I tried my best to find it. I wish I could see it, because these might be the first few movies that you actually directed. But I see you, since the work is more documentaries, but as a documentary artist, you're fantastic, right? And I think the one project that really stands out and is the most well known is Bobby Robson. So for the ones who don't know, Bobby Robson is a legendary manager, and starting in this documentary we have Jose Mourinho, Di Ronaldo, Pep Guardiola, Alex Ferguson, Alan Shearer. Amazing names, and having your name associated with them, maybe this gave a lot of confidence for you to grow as a director as well.
Yeah, I mean, the Bobby Robson film was an incredible project to be part of. It came from an idea of who I co-directed the film with, Gabriel Clark. I think it was in 2016 or 2017, he came across this statistic which was the last English manager to win a European trophy was Bobby Robson 20 years before, which was an incredible statistic. So, and he was very keen on doing a Bobby Robson film for quite a while, I believe. And yeah, for those who don't know, Bobby Robson is this kind of loved, this universally admired and loved character in English football. He was an incredibly successful manager across many decades. He was manager of England, took England to the semi-finals of the World Cup, and then he had this kind of extraordinary season in Barcelona in 95, 96. That hadn't really been documented much in the UK, and it was this season where he won a treble, he won 3 trophies, and then he was sacked at the end of the season. And it was all kind of to do with the politics of Barcelona. But then when we looked into that season in more depth, yeah, you just started to talk about these characters. Jose Mourinho was his number 2, Pep Guardiola was in the team. Brazilian Ronaldo, the phenomenal Ronaldo, Il Phenomenon was in the team. So, these incredible, iconic football legends, and they all talk about Bobby Robson, as this kind of father figure that helped them massively. So I was kind of brought onto the project and co-directed it with Gabriel. And I've got to be honest, it was the first kind of feature-length documentary that I worked on in a kind of a director capacity. But really, I was just learning on the job with Gabriel. For me, Gabriel's the most talented filmmaker in documentary, full stop. You have to look at his back catalogue, and you should interview him as well, because he's incredibly talented. And I was just very,
I'd love to.
Yeah, and to be honest, I was just very lucky to be able to work on the project with him. I spent a year working on it with him. I learned more in that year than I had in my entire career before that. And really it was these lessons in how to structure a story, how to prioritize key moments, key chapters, key themes, how to develop those themes over the course of 90 minutes. How to go about filming sequences, how to go about interviewing subjects and really getting to the bottom of what you want for the story. All of those kind of nuances of filmmaking, of documentary making, he's absolutely brilliant at, and I learned a huge amount from him during the Bobby Robson project. And then I took that on with me to a project that I worked on afterwards, which was a project about sport and disability, and then took that on again to the 14 Peaks project. But yeah, like you say, Bobby Robson, he was an incredibly loved figure. It was a real privilege to make the film about him. And I think what was unique about the film was as soon as we kind of got the family involved and they supported the project because they were supporting how we were going to tell the story. We then went out and approached Mourinho, Guardiola, Sir Alex Ferguson, Alan Shearer, Gary Lineker.
I'm sure they happily came in.
And they all, and they all of them agreed to be interviewed straight away. And you never get that in other football projects. But it's because they genuinely had this adoration and admiration and love for Bobby Robson, so they all agreed to do it. So although our kind of main character in the film was sadly deceased, he sadly passed away, but there was so much archive that we were able to tell the story via his words. So he was out of vision narrating his story, which was very powerful because he was a very emotional man and a very passionate man. And then alongside that, we just had this kind of stellar A-list cast. So we distributed the film ourselves in the UK. It had kind of limited theatrical run. And then Netflix bought the film, and it was on Netflix for 2 years worldwide, which was fantastic as well.
I was actually going to come to Gabriel. I assume that maybe him, or because you are in sports, you're editing this show, and all of a sudden you come into making documentaries. Did Gabriel come in, and how did it work out for you? Did you approach someone to insist on making documentaries? Did someone notice your work, or how did you meet Gabriel? Would you want to talk about that story?
Well, we actually, so Gabriel and I, along with another director-producer called John McKenna, and a very close friend of John's who came from a tech background called Barry Smith. The four of us co-founded a company called Noah Media Group. We co-founded that company, which began at the end of 2015. So there were four of us, four co-founders. Three of us kind of had this background in sports television. My background was kind of live sport and cutting. My background was directing, producing, and editing very short form content. So 30-second promos, 30-second trailers, 2 to 3 minute long features. I'd done these highlight shows, which as well. So I had no documentary experience at all. Whereas John and Gabriel had both worked for ITV for many years. So they've done TV documentaries before. So they'd made a documentary on Brian Clough, for example, that was Gris nominated. They'd made a boxing film that was BAFTA nominated. So they'd had these kind of very successful TV documentaries, which they'd made, and which they'd made together. So. And I'd helped them on Steve McQueen, The Man Le Mans as well, but only in a very small way. But even during that project, that was the kind of first documentary film that I'd been involved in, and I learned a huge amount from both of them during that, because Gabriel was overseeing the kind of the writing and the structuring of the film. He was overseeing the interviews, and then John was overseeing the kind of logistics of the production, but he was also overseeing the editing side of the project as well and pulling the whole film together. So, and I got a kind of glimpse of both of those sides of the documentary process by working with both of them. So that's kind of how the company started. And Noah Media Group, we have a kind of diverse range of kind of projects we work on. So we still do a lot of kind of short form commercial work for, we work with FIFA, UEFA, the Olympics, all of these huge kind of sporting partners, where we create features for them, we create commercials, promos, trailers. But then more and more what we're finding is that they want longer and longer form documentaries, because many of them are starting their own platforms and they're after their own content where they can attract audiences directly to their own platform. So what we're finding at the moment is for our team, which is a team of producers and directors, that the pathway that I went through, which is you start with a short form work, you start with a 3 to 5 minute feature, and the durations just get longer and longer. And so you might go up to a 30-minute show. You then might go up to an hour-long TV documentary, and then you go up to a 90-minute film documentary. But to be honest, the process and the skills you need are exactly the same. You know,
exactly.
Yeah. So it's about how can you structure a scene, how can you structure a sequence, how can you tell the story of a character, or how can you tell the story, you know, of an endeavor. You know, how can you create a 3-act structure with a beginning, middle, and end that feels satisfactory? It's all of those skills. It doesn't matter if you've got 1 minute or you've got 100 minutes. It's the same process and skills that you need to have. So my kind of development was, we began in 2015. For the first, I guess, 2 or 3 years, I was working on more of the short form content. And then I got the opportunity to work with Gabriel on the Bobby Robson film, because I wanted to get into longer form documentaries.
Were you working alone before 2015? After did you leave the TV thing, or what happened?
So I started off as a runner in 2006 at a company called Sunset and Vine. And Sunset and Vine are based in London. They're one of the biggest kind of independent production companies here that focus on sport. So they do a lot of live sport. So cricket was one of the things that they did. So I worked with them from 2006 to 2011. And they were an incredible company to work for. You know, one of the benefits of working in sport is you're thrown into the deep end straight away. You know, it's not like working in drama or working in entertainment. You know, so for me personally, I started off as a runner, and then a couple of months later, I was put onto a project as a researcher for this was like an evening football show. And then, you know, within the space of 3 or 4 weeks, you're out with a cameraman, you're filming in the day, you're coming back, you're editing, you know, a 3-minute feature that's going out that night on, you know, UK terrestrial TV. And you're thrown in the deep end, and you learn all of these skills very quickly. And that's
because you can't make mistakes. It just happened once, right?
Yeah.
There's only one take.
There's only one take.
So maybe that's why you learn to make no mistakes at all later in life.
No, you make mistakes all the time. But I think sport's a great kind of way to get into documentaries, I think, because you're thrown in the deep end. You learn skills very quickly, because I know that in other genres, for example, in drama, you know, from beginning off your career to the day where you're out directing a shoot and editing a shoot, that can be 10, 20 years, that process. Whereas when you go into TV, I guess it's a bit like local news, is you're out straight away, you're in at the deep end, and you're learning these incredibly valuable skills. And because sport is constant, and there's so much sports content that is in demand and that needs to be made, you know, you have these opportunities to get involved in it. So I worked at Sunset and Vine and learned an incredible amount from 2006 to 2011, and then I went freelance in 2011. So I was a freelance producer director for 4 years. And in that time, I did a lot of kind of big tournaments. So I went to Football World Cups and went to Olympics, and I did a lot of I did a lot of kind of global filming. I spent 6 months in Brazil filming ahead of the World Cup. I filmed in Canada, Russia, the Middle East. Did a lot of kind of.
You watched the big games.
Some of the big games. I got to watch the World Cup final in Brazil, which was good.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. But we were working at the time, supposedly.
No. But don't you get to like enjoy or live the moment, or have the privilege of, like, you know, witnessing the thing, or you just work and you don't focus on the ground? How does it work for working like working in Brazil in the World Cup finals? Don't you get like to have at least some amount of breather there, and like sense the moment, or are you just working?
So we kind of, I guess firstly, you're in a very privileged position to be there, and it's incredibly enjoyable. The specific project I was working on at the World Cup is we were making these 30-second trailers for each game. So we would, for example, we had a studio in Rio where we were filming, it was these trailers you see where, it's the build up to England v France. We'll use the best kind of match action shots, but then we'll also film, with a ballerina in the studio, and then it'll be intercut. So it'll be this kind of like artistic promotional trailer of a film, of a match. But then for a World Cup, because we had to do 2 for every single game, we had to do 128 of these, and in each one had to have its own kind of idea behind it. So on any given day, you'd be filming in the favelas in Rio, you'd be filming down at the beach with a surfer, you'd then be filming with someone doing fire breathing in a studio, you'd then be filming some, dancers, on top of a hill. It was this incredibly diverse kind of, these incredibly different kind of things that you needed to film, and you only had a couple of hours to film them. So it was incredibly fun in that sense, but it was also very time pressured. So you'd film it in the morning, you'd come back, you'd have a couple of hours to put it together, and then you'd have to send it out there. So, but it was incredibly valuable for me because it just taught you when you've got a limited time with a subject, or when there's a moment that you're trying to capture, you've really got to have in your idea a very clear sense of what you want to get out of this filming. Again, it's like, you can't just turn up and just roll and just film. It's very much right. What's the beginning of this scene? What's the detail of this scene? What's going to be the end of this scene? So that we can really structure our filming and maximize the time that we've got with an interviewee or with a subject or with a location. So that experience was really, really useful. But yeah, you don't really get an opportunity to enjoy the football side of it, because you're working very long hours. You're working every day for about 6 weeks, and you're partying quite hard as well. But it's very enjoyable.
Now, coming from a couple of hours in various places, shooting everything, to a couple of years inside your room. Like, how did you manage to get your time? How did you manage to fix everything? Did you save up for this? Did you avoid everything else just not to get distracted? Because I want to do something big, and I actually love cricket, and there's a really famous cricketer here from the captain of our team who just retired. I wanted to document his life, so I gave it a couple of weeks, and I realized it takes more than a couple of weeks. It takes a lot of time to actually understand the person, get into his be comfortable with him, and it took me time to understand the person. I actually saw a couple of series. I think it was The Test on Netflix.
Yeah, about the Australian
and I
team.
saw Mumbai. Yeah, the Ashes. Yeah. I loved it, and I also watched the Mumbai Indians thing on, I think, Amazon Prime.
Yeah,
I don't know if you know about it, but like you said, the big companies, UEFA, every sport is trying to put emotions to bring value to their sports, right?
Yeah.
It's not just dramatic 5-minute pieces. It's stories that people want to hear, and across these platforms, these are being distributed. But how did you convince yourself that I'm going to sit on this table, I'm going to make it worthwhile, I'm just going to spend 2 years on this project? For you, someone who is always on the rush, watching World Cup finals, moving all the time. So how did you manage to, I'm pretty sure there were a lot of responsibilities that you had to postpone for future. There are a lot of things that you wanted to do. I'm pretty sure now there are a lot of plans you have in your head, like 10 different things that you want to do. But how does someone take out a couple of years and work on something? Because that's something I've been struggling on.
Yeah, I think for me, there are a couple of things kind of out of my control, which were, so I traveled extensively, from about 2012 to 2018, did a lot of travel. And, after a while, you just become a bit phased by it all. And you want to spend more time at home. I had my partner gave birth to a daughter 2 years ago. So that definitely came into it as well, which funny enough was probably about a month before I started working on the project. So I knew that.
Oh wow!
So I knew that I wouldn't be traveling as much, and I wanted to be home a lot more anyway. So the idea of being at home with all of this footage, for the next 6 months, to really get my head around. That kind of synced up very nicely for me, because I wanted to travel far less anyway. But then also outside of that is obviously COVID hit, at the beginning of 2020. So we essentially went into lockdown when I started really going through Nims's footage for the first time. So again, it's like we couldn't do any filming. We couldn't go abroad to do any filming. So I had to spend 6 months, without leaving, going through the footage. So
a baby and a pandemic. That's I wasn't expecting.
Yeah. So I had no choice.
I couldn't do that.
I had no choice really.
But in such a stressful time as the pandemic, like how did you have the mindset? Because around where we are, around Nepal, the scene was very disturbing, watching people being miserable, living a miserable life, and you trying to be creative. It didn't work out for me, and I see you so focused, like you said, you worked for years and you were always so focused. So, and you're still going strong. After you returned, you're already in another project. That is definitely how it works. not how it works in Nepal. Or I don't think many people have that kind of motivation. So, what inspires you to, I know it's a very cheesy question, but what inspires you to, is it the passion for telling stories, or what drives you?
For me, I just really enjoy the process. I really enjoy the kind of jigsaw piece challenge of trying to put a story together. I really, to take 14 Peaks for example, having all of that footage, speaking to Nims and learning about how incredible his life was. His life story is equally as remarkable as Project Possible. So the idea of, right, how do we bring all that together in a 90-minute film? I just love that challenge. How do we structure that? How do you decide on what's important, what's not important? What other characters need to be part of the story? What's our beginning, middle, and end? I love the kind of the theoretical side of pulling the story together on an editorial level, and that kind of jigsaw element. And then I really enjoy the filming process. You get to travel the world. You get to meet incredible characters. You get to witness incredible scenes. But for me, strangely enough, the most enjoyable part of the process is the editing. I really, really enjoy the editing. So how?
It is funny that we were in a club. You remember the big screen where we showed the second one?
Yeah.
Later on the night.
Yeah.
And you said to me that it's after everyone watched the trailer and they went crazy. You told me that it's funny because you edited it on your bedroom, on your bed or something.
Yeah.
And it's not something that I'd expect from a project that's going to Netflix. Someone is doing it in their laptop in their bedroom.
Yeah.
It's not even like the most expensive laptop in the world. It's just a laptop that can edit, right? So that shows the power of what can be achieved in the most smallest of in the most, I don't know the term, but in the most smallest of conditions,
Yeah.
of what you can do, what you can achieve.
Yeah.
So
100%.
that was really amazing.
Yeah.
So I looked all over to, I researched what Torquil Jones is. I didn't find anything. I couldn't find you, where you were born, your age, because I wanted to compare, like I wanted to be somewhere in my life and I wanted to compare it with you. And I couldn't even find your age, right? I couldn't find anything. You don't have an Instagram. The only way to tag you is through your company, Noah. So that's the only thing. Could you maybe tell us where you're from, or like, if you're comfortable, what age did you start filmmaking and everything? Like, could you just tell me? I'm just curious.
Yeah.
If you don't want, it's okay.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So I'm 37 is my age. So I'm so I'm a year younger than Nims. Nims is 38, or I'm about 6 months younger. So the good thing about working with Nims is whenever you're feeling whenever you're feeling proud of yourself, or you're feeling good about yourself, you then look at Nims and you say, right, Nims is the same age as me. And he's climbed 14 peaks in 6 months. He's been in the Gurkhas, he's been in the Special Forces, he's climbed K2 in winter. So immediately, you think, if you ever get to a stage where you think you've achieved quite a lot, you stand next to Nims and he puts you in your place. So I don't have that issue. But yeah, no, I was born in the southwest of England, in a city called Bath. In 1984, I kind of went to a very average state school. I didn't go to university. Instead, I went traveling for a couple of years. So I actually came to Nepal. I spent 6 weeks.
What?
Yeah. So I spent 6 weeks in Nepal.
Oh my God! When I was you've been to Nepal?
Yeah. So when I was about
that's amazing.
When I was about 19, I spent 6 weeks in Nepal. I was in Kathmandu. I flew to Lukla and then did a trek up to Everest Base Camp.
Oh man, that's such a story. It was all meant to be, right?
Yeah. It was. I absolutely loved it. It was a friend and I backpacking. I went to Pokhara. That was incredibly enjoyable. But it was during the.
That's in 2001.
Yeah, it was during the.
It's 20 years ago.
Yeah, it was 20 years
Almost.
ago. And when I came to Kathmandu for the obviously the premiere, it changed so much. When I was there, there were the issues with the Maoist uprising, so there was a curfew everywhere from 6 p.m. every night.
That was a phase, man.
Yeah. And I remember when we were trekking up to Namche Bazaar, there were a couple of days where, in the tea houses we were staying at, there was some patrolling guards that would come through the tea houses with the rifles out looking for people. So it was an incredibly different experience. But I just thought the Nepali people were so welcoming, so generous. Incredible people. So for those couple of years, I came to Nepal, traveled in India, South America, Southeast Asia. And then I knew that I wanted to get into film. Originally, it was film drama that I wanted to get into.
Did this travel period help you in any ways to figure out things? Because I see a lot of people, like, we don't get to get that privilege in Nepal, unfortunately. But after your you get, like, after your teen life, 19, 18, 20, whatever, you just go out and travel, see a few countries, clear off your head. Maybe that did that help in any ways to figure out where you wanted to be?
I think it's more about the effect it has on your attitude to opportunities. I think that when growing up in the UK, living in the UK, you're incredibly privileged. You're in a very, very kind of wealthy economy. You have very, very good, support in terms of health, education, security. There's an incredible amount of opportunity. So when you travel at that young age and you travel to countries like Nepal, I think it's that realization for the first time in your life about how lucky you are on some levels, on say on an economic level, for example, of how lucky you are. So I think when I came back from traveling, I was thinking about going to university and studying film and TV skills, but I spoke to a couple of people that were in the industry, and they just said, you could do a degree, but you might spend 3 years doing it, and then you'll come out the other side and you'll be at the bottom of the ladder, because unless I didn't have any kind of ins to the TV or film world. There was no one I knew that I could try and kind of tap into, and I didn't have any of those connections. So I knew that I'd have to start at the bottom of the ladder, as a runner. So I just thought, I'm just going to dive straight into it. So as soon as I came back from traveling, I just started working as a runner, and then became a researcher, and then an assistant producer, and then a producer.
What was your job as a runner? Like daily errands, or just go there, get me coffee, or like?
Oh yeah.
What did you do?
You make tea. You go around the office asking people how they take their tea, how they take their coffee. You're delivering.
Oh man.
You're delivering packages.
This is so inspiring. Wow. Thank you for sharing the story, man. I always try to get people to listen to these kind of stories, because everyone who's reached on top of somewhere, they always start the grind from they make tea.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you're doing all that kind of stuff. But and I think it's really about what is your attitude to the job at that point. If you go into it thinking, right, my long-term aim is I want to rise up and I want to work creatively on these exciting projects. If that's your attitude and you just give it everything, it will happen. You'll rise up very quickly, and that's what happened to me, really. And I think that by traveling and by experiencing what life is like in different parts of the world, and how how lucky we are in the UK, and how there are lots of jobs available if you apply yourself in the right way, and there's incredible amounts of opportunities. If you've got the right attitude, then you can do it relatively easy in TV and film, because it's not. You don't need to spend years and years dedicating yourself to, it's not rocket science what we do. It's very straightforward on many levels. So, and I'm one of the kind of senior figures at our company, Noah Media Group, at the moment, and we have people joining us as researchers, assistant producers now, and it's always the same, which is it's not about your skill level at that point. It's not about your experience at that point. It's all about your attitude. If people have the right attitude and they're going to give it everything, and they're positive, and they treat people in the right way, and they react well to information and to criticism, and if you're like that, you'll get given the opportunities. It's all about your attitude.
Just a very silly question. How do you deal with people who are super talented but are really lazy, like don't come in time and stuff like that? How do you deal with those kind of things?
I'm trying to think of if there's anyone I can think of. To be honest, I've never worked closely with someone like that, because the world of kind of sports TV and documentary in the UK is very small. Everyone knows everyone. So if you're that kind of person, you'll get found out very quickly. And particularly,
you'll get fired.
And you'll get fired, yeah. And particularly at Noah Media Group, we've tried to have this kind of internal policy from day one, which has always been to bring in people that are kind of recommended or it's just very clear that they're hardworking and have a good attitude from the beginning. And if anyone comes across as lazy, they're not gonna last. They're not gonna, they'll be. It's not the right environment.
I want you to, because I find this is such a culture in Nepal that everyone is so laid back. I don't know if you realize, but everyone is really laid back. I see so many good creators, and they always talk about how Nepal does not have a chance at international scene or anything, but everyone is so goddamn lazy. Nothing happens in time, and it's our own fault. So, is there something that you could advise on the people who are listening? I'm sure a lot of people will listen to this because and maybe it'll help, because there are a lot of talents that I see, but the effort and, like you said, the attitude would miss. So do you have a story or an example maybe where you faced such situations or anything?
I guess
I just want to hear about the work ethics there, because it's so strict, right? If you do you guys, even if you don't have work, do you just go in time in office, or like how does it work?
Right. Well, for me, because we're trying to grow this company, and we're trying to do more and more documentaries each year. For example, next year we're going to have 3 different film documentaries all released at the end of the year. They're all being worked on. So I'm directing one of them, Gabriel's directing another, and then there's a 3rd film already that's being directed by someone else. So we're kind of, because we run the company, we have shareholders in the company, we've committed to growing the company at a certain level each year. We have this kind of responsibility this kind of output responsibility to make a certain amount of projects per year that we have to stick to. So for me, the project I'm working on now, this Formula One project, that I have a deadline, which is the end of October, where the film has to be delivered because it's being released by the end of the year, which means that my edit has to begin in February, which means I have to have filmed the majority of the film by the end of January. So really, I think it's having those, in documentary, I've met a lot of filmmakers where they will try and raise the money for a project at the beginning, and maybe they won't have the full amount, but they'll still go into production and they'll try and raise money as they're filming, as they're editing bit by bit. And then they'll get into the edit and they'll see how the film comes along, and they might take a pause from the edit and they might go back into the edit. They might try and find what the film is in the edit and what is the actual story. Whereas we don't work like that, because we've come from this very kind of disciplined live TV background where you have a very fixed deadline and you have to produce this content by a certain time or by a certain day. I really like to work in that way, because I don't want to work on films for 3-4 years at a time. I'd prefer to spend 18 months on a project, deliver it and move on to something else. So really, I think it's about, my advice to anyone else would be to give yourself a very hard deadline for when you're delivering the project. Work back from that, have a very fixed schedule that you commit to, and then that will give you all the urgency that you need. So I think it's about it's not allowing yourself any time to move away from the project or to delay filming, or it's not allowing yourself to be lazy in that sense by giving yourself very strict deadlines to work to. And I think it's good for the creative part of the process as well. I don't think it's good to just be in an edit endlessly with a story, because I think you just end up going around in circles. You go in with an idea of how you want to tell the story. if you're just endlessly re-editing scenes and chapters and sequences, I think you can very quickly lose the initial kind of gut instinct you had about what the power of the story was. So that's what I'd say. And I think for, in terms of the bigger cultural aspect of the question, I would just say, look at Nims. He's Nepali. He's the most disciplined person I've ever met. I think there's no reason.
You think so?
Yeah. I remember I was with him 2 months before he did K2 in winter, and he had nothing planned. He was like, right, I'm going to do this. He had nothing in place. But he did it. He pulled it all together, and he did it because he's this whirlwind force of nature. But, so I think in terms of Nepalese, having that kind of mindset, I would just say, yeah, look at Nims and what he does, what he achieves. And
after the premiere, I think he's somewhere in Antarctica or something, right?
Yeah, he's in Antarctica now.
No, some part of the world where there's no network. I tried to reach him, but I couldn't. Like, it wouldn't just go through. He's on something. He's doing something unhuman.
He's climbing the highest mountain in Antarctica right now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. Do you need to go for your meeting, or should we carry on?
It's not for another 20 minutes, so.
All right. So I just saw that you are a part of the Arsene Wenger, the Invisible. Are you involved in this, or is the company doing it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm credited as a producer, but really, I helped. I helped out on a few aspects of the film, but it was essentially directed by Gabriel, co-directed it with a French filmmaker called Christian Jean-Pierre, and then the film was really kind of produced and pulled together by a guy who works for Noah Media called Andrew Lynch, who's a very talented filmmaker as well, very young guy. So those three kind of made the film. I just helped on a couple of things, but I think that's an example really where, at Noah we have 4 or 5 films going on all the time. So really, when I say that I'm working on 14 Peaks for 2 years, I'm also kind of helping on other projects as well, whenever I have any time around, because there's always part of the process, you'll know, where you're waiting for an interviewee to confirm, or you're waiting for something to happen. So you always get little pockets of time. And then because we're trying to do more and more films, because we're trying to grow the company, there's endless amounts of work that I can be helping, other projects that I can be helping on as well.
All right, so it's all about the team, right? So it's all about the team, because I've seen a lot of work that you've been doing, which is very close to Gabriel. And how does the relationship work? Is he kind of a mentor to you, or how does it work? Do you guys have equal contribution towards your project? I know the 14 Peaks, you did wonders in that, but where does he come in? Do you call him up when you're stuck on something, or do you just hang out and talk about other stuffs about life, or how does it work, the relationship with you and Gabriel?
Well, on 14 Peaks, really, I mean, he's how it's working at the moment is kind of, I'm directing a project, he's directing another project, and we kind of use each other as sounding boards, really. Me more so asking for his advice, because he's very experienced and editorially, his background is as a journalist, so he's incredibly strong in terms of the storytelling, editorial aspect. So on 14 Peaks, really, how it worked out is I, having spoken to Nims, having researched the story, gone through all the articles I could find online. I read a very early draft of Nims's book, which had a lot of great detail in. I was very fortunate that Nims's ghostwriter, who had, I was able to listen to a lot of interviews that Nims had given, talking about Project Possible. So I had a very good sense of what the story was. I then got a structure for the film down on paper. So early on in production, I then went to Gabriel and just said, I spent probably 3 or 4 hours with him, where I just explained to him, right, this is the film on paper, these are the chapters. And then it's really just bouncing ideas off each other, like, is this chapter right here? Would it work better earlier or later? What are the trigger points going to be? What are the transitions between the chapters? Are we developing certain aspects of the story enough? Does this kind of film make sense on paper as a story? And he's very good at kind of giving ideas to that and challenging that. So really it was a case of me using him as a sounding board and as a sanity check at the beginning of the project on paper. And then what happened is when we got further down the line in terms of the edit, once we had a kind of rough cut of the film down, and I think the first cut was about 2.5 hours long, I would then send him the edit. He was the first person that I shared the edit with, and then he would send me back his kind of overriding thoughts, general thoughts, and then we would make those changes to the edit. And then basically as we got further and further along the process, and the film became more and more kind of focused and more like a final cut, he would then give me his opinion, his thoughts, and his notes on very, very specific things. So a specific line of dialogue, whether this line of dialogue is necessary, or do they say it in a different way, or do you need even at the micro level of, can you remove these 2 words from this sentence so it's clearer? So, and this is the stuff that he is absolutely brilliant in, is these kind of micro details, that these tiny changes you make that just make a scene a lot more kind of coherent and a lot stronger. So really with him, it's his involvement was at the start of the process and at the end of the process.
Is it always very professional, or like I've realized people working in filmmaking have their own very circle, like they always are hanging around with the crew, very less friends around. That's what I've realized. And is it always very professional, or do you guys? For me, I've experienced shit.
Oh, sorry, Susan, you've just paused. I can't hear you.
No worries. Like I was saying, what I've experienced is that filmmakers have very limited friends. They always hang around with the same group and everything. And once again, Nepali problems. you there. You're talking about big stuff. You're talking about winning the Oscars and everything. It's just another night of just drinking and talking, and nothing really happens. So how do you divide that kind of relationship? Like, I'm sure you guys have had a lot of really amazing experiences as friends also, if I'm not wrong. So
yeah,
how does that work? How does keeping a relationship professional and being a friend work?
Well, I think I guess one example would be so the editor on the project, Ian Grech, who I've known for probably 15 years now. I've worked with him on so many things. When I was working at Sunset and Vine, and when I was freelance, I was working with him on short form promos and trailers, and we were traveling a lot together to World Cups and Olympics, and he was doing all that kind of stuff as well. So this was the first kind of feature film that he'd worked on also. And on this we were together in the edit for every single day for kind of 8 months, pretty much.
You're just sitting next to him.
Yeah, pretty much. So again, it was during the kind of it was during the second lockdown of COVID here, and no one was coming into our office apart from Ian and I. And we would both cycle in, we would sit in the same room all day and then cycle home. So, but he's a very close friend also. And I've known him for many years, and we've socialized an incredible amount. I guess in terms of separation, it's really, I was just so fired up for the film because I just saw it as such a good, such a great opportunity, and I was so into the story, and I was so into Nims as a character. But alongside that, there was a great responsibility towards Nims and his team because they'd risked their lives to film this. He'd risked everything for Project Possible. So again, it goes back to that sense of, right, what's our deadline here? We have this responsibility to Nims, and also to the financiers of the film and to the company that is backing the film, to make to deliver the best possible film in that time frame. So, I guess again it just goes back to that discipline. Because of my experiences on the Bobby Robson film and my experiences on other projects about where you need to be at certain points of the edit, because I've worked on projects where with 3 weeks to go, the edit is just a complete mess, and you're scrambling around trying to pull together the story you want to tell, and it's just a nightmare. And you never want to be in that situation. You want to be in a situation where you have a very strong cut early on, and then it's really a case of going over it again and again and again and again, and focusing on every single line of dialogue, every single shot, every single scene. And the more that you go through that process, the more you finesse it, the stronger the film's going to be. So you have to get ahead of the game in that sense, and you have to be very strict with yourself about where you want to be. So as one example, for the edit for 14 Peaks, Ian and I can also edit. I can't edit to the same standard that Ian edits to because he's absolutely brilliant, but I can edit. So how it'd work is I would pull together a chapter. So for example, in 14 Peaks, there's probably about 40 chapters. So chapters can range from 1 minute to say 5 minutes. So what I do is I would bring together all of the quotes, all of the visuals, the paint shots, the music. I would bring it all into a sequence and prepare it for Ian. Ian would then pull the sequence together, and then we'd basically move on to the next chapter. So we had an edit schedule whereby we would say, okay, next Tuesday, I'm going to be preparing chapter 17 and you're going to be editing chapter 21. And it was that discipline. So every single day we had this kind of, right, by the end of today, we have to be at the end of this chapter. We have to have done this. Otherwise, we're going to be behind our schedule. So I think... And
you use reference music, just download it from somewhere and use it, or wait for the music?
Yeah, so I just used commercial reference tracks. So for 14 Peaks, we had there was a lot of music from Sicario, the film Sicario. Mm-hmm. A lot of music from a series called The Alienist. There was a few tracks from Ozark, the Netflix series. So you're just using them as a kind of guide for what the tone's going to be like. And then kind of probably about halfway through the offline edit, our composer Anita then came on board and started to really kind of work with sequences that were formed. She knew that timings would change and stuff like that, but at least she could start preparing the kind of original score. It's funny, just to cut you off, sorry. It's funny because one of my friends had mentioned in his story about the part where the 14 Peaks starts and the Ozark music. Well, that were very similar. Well, we didn't actually. No,
that's pure coincidence.
The Ozark reference wasn't that bit. It was a completely different chapter. But it's interesting that it's similar.
Yeah, so someone actually had mentioned this story. No. There is always some kind of inspiration from somewhere. It's just wisely using it, and like it gets better. This whole cinema industry gets better as time goes, right?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, Cesar.
So one.
Sorry, I've got to jump on this call, but this call shouldn't be long. Do you want me to go and do that, and then I'll just jump back on? It's probably going to be...
how long... all right.
It's probably going to be 20 minutes, maybe 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah, sure. Definitely. We'll take a break as well.
Is that okay? Sorry about that. I just couldn't get out of it.
No worries. All right, sure.
Cool. I'll be back in a sec.
All right, so I think the last thing I was asking was, so we resume. The last thing I was asking was, a lot of people, I don't know if it's just Nepal or everywhere, who have very less idea about filmmaking, documentary making, anything. They just know about the actors and the directors. And since you've been a producer for so many projects, like how would you simplify and explain what a producer does in a movie or a documentary? How would you describe his role?
Do you mean compared to a director?
Yeah, because I believe they're equally important. So, just to explain, just to give a brief narrative of what the role is like.
Yeah, well, I mean, the way we work on our films is the director kind of has creative oversight of the film. And that is really a case of how the story is told, what's the narrative, who's going to be interviewed, what's the structure of that interview, what are the quotes that you want to get, what archive are you going to use, how are you going to put the film together, what music are you going to use to enhance the story. All of those creative decisions really are made by the director. And then the producer is really it's really overseeing the production and the logistical delivery of the project, which for documentaries is really important because, you know, in the films that I've worked on, say for example Bobby Robson, Gabriel was more hands-on in terms of the creative, and I was more hands-on in terms of the production. So really, that's anything from agreeing what the contracts are between the contributors in the film or the locations in the film, and the company that owns the film. It's agreeing those kind of how the film is going to be set up, financially, legally. And then once you're getting into production, it's really kind of, right, how are we going to schedule the film? What's our pre-production, production, post-production schedules? Where are we going to film? Where are we, it's contacting interviewees, contacting locations and contributors. It's making stuff happen, essentially. And it's really, especially on a lot of the films that we work on in sport, is a lot of them are very archive based, So for example, on Bobby Robson, which was, the majority of the film was archive, is that archive search was the first thing that we did. So even before you get a sense of what is the story, or even months before you even film anything, we're doing a massive worldwide archive search. So for example, the film I'm working on at the moment, the film about Villeneuve and Peroni, I have 3 archive producers working on it simultaneously. One's based in the UK, one's based in the US, one's based in Italy. And we've been looking at archive and trying to find footage and photographs for the last kind of 6-7 months. So that process is really important, and it's kind of, it's a massive part of the film. Is finding that unseen or little seen material that's really going to make the film kind of different to other. Because a lot of the stories we cover, they've been told in various guises before, in certain ways. So, because it's very rare that you get a sports story that hasn't been told before. So really, it's a case of, well, if you're going to do it, you have to tell the story in a new way. You have to come with a unique angle. So uncovering archive and uncovering new footage is a massive part of that. So really, the producer overseeing that aspect of the film is very important. And then once you get into the edit, how we work generally is the director. Sometimes the director will be in the edit suite working with the editor, but sometimes the director will be quite removed. And sometimes we'll have a producer that is actually pulling together the film with the editor, with the director feeding in. So the producer is really a kind of all-encompassing role, where you have the responsibility to deliver the film, to deliver that project, and part of that is the creative, but part of that is the operations, the production, the logistics. It's crewing the film, it's helping to get the filming organized, to get the filming done. It's overseeing the edit process. It's overseeing the grade and the sound mix and the online and the conform, and it's working out all the deliverables. For example, with 14 Peaks, the delivery process with Netflix is vast. We delivered the film in HDR, we delivered it in Dolby Atmos, we delivered it in Dolby 5.1. There's all these technical elements to the film that are incredibly complicated, and the producer will oversee that aspect of the project as well. So a lot of things in the filmmaking process fall under that producer role.
It's funny because most of the things here in Nepal is, even for a movie, is taken care by the director, and producer is basically the management, right? So having the creative side and the management side all taken care by one person. Here, the producer mostly spends his money, and that's about it. that feels every time. That feels every time.
Yeah. The producer brings the money in, and the director spends the money. That's how it works. Yeah.
I overheard you talking about your first short films, of how you don't want people to find them. Could we maybe talk about maybe the mistakes that you had and you learned from them, maybe?
Well, I guess the first short film
why
I did.
Why wouldn't you want us to watch it?
Because it's awful. It's just awful. Everything about it is awful. I think so. I made a short film, and it was a drama. It was only like 5 minutes long. But the mistake I made was, I wrote a kind of short script for it. It was about two characters. I think they were brothers. They had a very complex relationship, and it was about a conversation they had.
Fall?
No, this was a short film called "Do You Feel Lucky, Punk?" But it's so bad I can't even begin to tell you. But my mistake was, and I did it it was probably 7 or 8 years ago, so it was very early on. But my mistake was I wanted to shoot it on a red camera. I wanted to use a proper kind of crew. I wanted it to look very nice, sound very nice. It was graded in a proper grade suite. And I was focusing on the wrong parts of the story, which were, I wasn't focusing on what the actual story was. I was focusing on the kind of how good it was going to look, and the technicalities of it. And that would be my biggest kind of advice to people would be, it doesn't, 14 Peaks, loads of 14 Peaks is shot on GoPro. It doesn't matter what camera you're using. It doesn't matter how big your crew size is. It doesn't matter what the kind of software and hardware you're using to pull it all together. It's all about, is the story strong enough? Are the characters strong enough? How are you telling that story? And it doesn't matter it doesn't matter the cameras you're using or the people that you're using. It's all about that, focusing on what's really important, which is, if you have a really strong story, you can film it on an iPhone and it will be brilliant, because viewers will be engaged in the story. So that would be the biggest thing I learned.
Nice. Also, I was pretty surprised that as far as the Netflix standard of quality is announced, they have specific cameras for it, but apparently they even allow iPhone footages in. That was a surprise for me.
Yeah, I mean, they were. A lot of everything that we shot for the film was shot on Red or Arri. In terms of the interviews, in terms of the filming we did with NIMS, it was all shot 4K, and so the big parts of the film were shot on very high spec, what you'd call, I guess, cinematic cameras.
The difference.
You tell the difference, but then it was specifically with the footage that NIMS shot, which was a combination of GoPro, I think it was A7S2, some other DSLR cameras.
Were they phone footages as well?
There's a few shots in there that were shot on the phone as well. But on the iPhone these days you can shoot 4K, and it looks fantastic. So, but Netflix were very good in the way that they obviously wanted the film to be technically delivered to a very high spec, which it was. But their creative team and their post-production team specifically, they understand that in certain moments, the story is the most important thing. So if there are so for example, there's certain shots in the film where there's grit and mud and dust on the camera, and we had a conversation with Netflix about, was it important that we really cleaned those images up so that when you watch them on a cinema screen, it's the best image possible. And my argument was, we're in the moment, we're in the scene. It doesn't matter if we're doing our job properly and people are connecting to the story and are taken by the story, they won't even notice stuff like that. And Netflix were very good on stuff like that. They agreed that there are moments where technically we have to get to a certain level, but there are moments also where the story is the most important thing. And that's the great thing about documentaries is, some of the best documentaries have been shot very poorly. But the stories are so good that you're not thinking about these things when you, as a viewer.
Maybe it adds on the reality of it, and it makes you feel very, very, very real, not staged. So maybe it even elevates the quality, especially how NIMS shot everything, like the way he was frustrated on the table. I thought that was staged, but with a poor camera. But he actually had it all planned. The Gorkha shots, the archive, it was amazing how he had planned it all since the beginning. It seems like he knew this thing would happen in his life long before even it did. That was well.
And the shot of him, with his head in his hands at the desk, that is completely genuine. He shot that at one of his lowest moments. It's on a GoPro. And that conversation took place. Yeah, we didn't reconstruct that in any way.
Mm-hmm. So I found my footages in there, and I've never seen my footages so good. What happened? What are you guys doing? How is it so good? I was like. Someone was saying, "Okay, that's Kathmandu. That looks so beautiful." I was like, "I shot that thing. I was so proud of it." when we watched the premiere.
Well, I've got to say, for people watching this, is every time you see Kathmandu in the film, you shot it, you filmed it. It's brilliant.
But it looks. The footages look better than ever. I've never seen my what is do you guys color grade it yourself, or is it Netflix, or how does it work?
No, so we use a company called Round Table Films, who are based in London. We've worked with them on a number of films now, and they're just they're one of the best in the business in terms of what they do, which is they will we will finish the edit at NOAA in-house. So we'll have a locked version of the edit where we're using proxies and we're using low resolution footage, but the film is locked in terms of these are the shots, this is the audio, and then we will send that to them. They will reconnect all the footage to the 4K footage.
You
and the highest
physically send a
footage.
hard drive to them, or is there a server?
Yeah, so what happens is we will, every time, so there's a project, so we edit in Premiere, there's a project for the edit, and then what we do is every time archive comes in or every time we film something, we'll make a proxy version of that footage. Mm-hmm. So we'll have a kind of mirror folder structure of the original footage and the proxy footage. We'll edit with the proxy footage, which just means that the Premiere runs smoother and you have less glitches. And then we'll then You can work on a laptop at home, and it's very smooth. And what will happen is once we've got a locked cut, we'll then send them a hard drive with both folder structures. They'll reconnect the project entirely back to all the raw footage. And then it's a case of they will resize everything. They will go through every single frame. They will clean up stuff. They will obviously relight certain parts of the footage. They will anything that isn't 4K, they will up resolution to 4K. And then they grade it. I've forgotten what the software is called, but they'll grade it in a cinematic grading suite. And that's so. For example, the footage that you shot, they will. If it wasn't shot in 4K, if it was shot in HD, they will up resolution it to 4K using the best possible software, and then they'll grade it. They'll clean up the image and then they'll grade it as well. So they do an amazing job.
I got a lot of questions about the color grading because a lot of people struggle on it. So do you actually need a really expensive setup with the physical knobs to grade it, a very expensive software, or is it possible through the basic Premiere color correction?
Well, I mean, for the films we use the kind of the professional knobs, and we go the whole 9 yards with it, because we have the budget in place to do that. But a lot of projects I've worked on where we don't have the money or we don't have the time, they're graded in Premiere and it looks, the thing is I'm actually slightly colorblind, so I'm useless. I'm useless when it comes to the color grade.
You're not making an excuse, are you?
No. I'm absolutely hopeless. Yeah. So I mean, we went a little full circle on 14 Peaks. So I had a conversation very early with the colorist. He's a very talented colorist called Jack, very early on, and we talked about, should we grade the mountains in a certain way, and every time that Nims is not on the mountains and maybe is in Kathmandu, should it have a slightly, I don't know, yellow hue, or so it feels slightly different to the mountains. And then anytime we do part of his backstory, should we grade it slightly differently? So we went into the grade with kind of quite a, I guess, creative mindset of how the grade could be used as another editorial layer, perhaps. And we did that, and it just didn't work at all. So we went back to a kind of very natural look of let's just bring out the kind of colors a bit more. It kind of went back to more of a natural look across the board.
I think it's really good.
Yeah, and Jack did, and Jack did an amazing job on it. But it does take you a while to get to that stage. We had kind of maybe 8 weeks from the film being locked to the film being actually finished. So, yeah, the grade was probably worked on for about 6 or 7 weeks. Going for every single shot. Yeah.
Wow. Having that consistency really takes a lot of it's. I think it's even more difficult to make it look natural throughout, because it's been shot through so many different cameras. So many different cameras.
The cameras are operated by different members of the team who have different settings, different locations, different times of day, different exposure level. Yeah, so it's just trying to balance them. And I think that's very much the first pass is always just to try and balance everything before you actually do anything else. And another problem we had was because of COVID, we struggled with traveling globally. So a lot of the interviews were shot by local teams. So we had interviews in the US, we had interviews in Italy, in the Czech Republic, in the UK. We had a lot of different DOPs filming on different cameras as well. So just trying to balance the interviews out and making them look consistent as well was a challenge.
Also, I thought you were there in the interviews. Like, how does it go? Like, as an interviewer, you will want to look into the eye, ask the questions yourself. Well, we did a couple of interviews with the for Sherpas here. You were always there on WhatsApp. the laptop. You
With you
existed.
translating, yeah.
We actually you existed in a laptop for 2 years. For as long as we worked together, and we just met on the premiere, so that was beautiful. So how does it even if you don't know the language, you seem to know that you've had enough, or if you're interviewing someone really good, I'm sure it's a lot easier interviewing the famous mountaineers because they've done this 1,000 times. They can play around with words, but with difficult people, maybe not just for 14 Peaks, but with other projects as well. What mindset do you go with, and do you get satisfied when others take the interview for you?
Well, I mean, on 14 Peaks, I mean, I did all the interviews apart from one.
Mm-hmm.
So for the interviews, obviously for Nims, I spent 3 days with Nims doing interviews in a studio. Just
3 days.
3 days, yeah. Well, 3 not full days, but 3 big sessions.
The sessions, yeah.
Big sessions. At the very start of the project. I then interviewed him again at the end because there were a few things that I was missing. And then I interviewed Suchi and Kamal in person. I went to Italy and interviewed Messner in person. It was really
just for the interviews.
Just for the interview with Messner, yeah. And then I interviewed Garrett and Cara over Zoom. Jimmy was the only person I didn't speak to direct, but I gave the questions to Chai, his wife. Chai interviewed him and then added her own questions as well. So yeah, I guess on the projects I've worked with before, if I'm leading the creative, I'll always do the interview myself rather than get someone else to do it, unless it's in a different language. So for example, the film I'm working on at the moment, I'm going to Italy next week to film, and 3 of the interviewees are in Italian, and it needs to be done in Italian. So basically I've done a list of questions and a structure for the interview, but then I'm getting a local Italian producer to do the interview, because I think I've worked on projects before where, I can ask someone in English and they'll give you the answer, say, for example, in Italian. By the time it takes them to explain what they've said, you completely lose the flow of an interview. Whereas I think it makes more sense to say, right, these are the questions I want you to ask. These are the points that we have to get. These are the lines that we need to get based on interviews they've done in the past or articles I've read where they've said this. But really, I think it's up to using someone who speaks the language to get really into the flow of the interview. So if the interviewee says something interesting, they can follow up with another question and follow up with another question. I think breaking it up with the language barrier is it makes it too... Yeah, you just don't get that natural conversation that leads to those really, great lines. So that's how I would work, yeah.
I actually asked a lot of people to hand over some questions to you. It was mostly about things that I've already asked you, but interestingly, there was a lot of people wanted the documentary to be longer, or maybe 2 parts, because they told they told me that it just made climbing for 14 mountains look too easy, or maybe the climbing part should have been longer. I understand. I get the flow. Maybe they're used to the Bollywood dramatic thing, maybe crying on the mountain stuff, but that's not what happened. And I love the snappy part of it. Like every time it's just go, go, go. Not a shot there is wasted. I am a YouTuber. I do vlogging and everything with the camera around. So I understand the modern technique of storytelling has a certain snap to it. you don't want to hold it too long. One of my friends were like, they were not satisfied with the giving up is not in the blood, sir. They should have built it up and made it more dramatic. But I think the way you just didn't do what was expected was brilliant. Was even more brilliant, because you get my point, right?
Yeah, no. I mean, it's great to hear. I think. I mean, there was enough footage there to make a series, for sure. But I think we were just very clear early on that we just wanted to make the most accessible, entertaining, thrilling, action-packed adventure film possible, so that it would really break out from that kind of core audience and be something that anyone can watch and be inspired by. You know, and I've had loads of messages via friends and family of kids who have watched it, or parents who have watched it with their children, or parents who've watched it with their parents, or, you know, and it feels like everyone's connecting to it because of Nim's character and his drive, you know, and his his inspiring kind of backstory. So we agreed very early on that the best way to do that, rather than a kind of long drawn out series where, you know, a series would have been very strong, and, you know, we could have got into much more granular detail about the climbs and about the technical difficulties and stuff like that. But we thought that would appeal to a certain audience, but it'd be very hard to get an audience to engage with that and stay with that to the end. So we thought, you know, very early on, the best way, do a one-off film where you can condense the story, you can make it as thrilling as possible, and you can maybe get to a much bigger global audience, because it will be different to other stories in the genre. And, you know, it was very challenging. The first edit was about 2.5 hours long, so it was about an hour longer than the finished film. And Ian and I, the editor, and I thought that was pretty tight, and we were leaving a lot on the edit room floor. But then, you know, Netflix said that they wanted it shorter, which was, you know, at the beginning of that process, we were like, oh God, are we cutting this too tight? Is it limiting it too much? But I think actually, looking back at it, it was the exact decision, because, you know, we just want people to tune in, and within a minute you're with Nims, you're in the story, and then you don't stop watching. You're on the edge of your seat from minute 1 to minute 99, which is the duration of the film, and it's this roller coaster ride, and then it's finished, and then you can just let the film sink in, and, you know, and it's been amazing to see the reaction that people have had to the film. And I think part of it is it's a short film. You start the film, you're into it. It's this roller coaster ride of emotion and kind of epic scenery and this incredible story, but it's a limited length. It's not a really long film, and it's not a series.
Do you miss any part that you really wanted it, like, in the movie, or are you just happy with everything?
There were a couple of things. There was a scene in the film. So when Nims started phase 2, he had to travel to Pakistan secretly because of his years in the special forces. Yeah, because of his army background, his military background. There was a level of danger towards him, that because he was going to these remote regions of Pakistan, you know, close to the Afghan border.
Very suspicious.
And he was heading straight to Nanga Parbat, and there had been a terrorist attack there, I think back in 2013, that involved kind of mountaineers as well. So there was a scene in the film where he announced on his social media that the project was on hold because he couldn't raise any more funds. And then he had to travel to Pakistan in secret. And then he arrived at Nanga Parbat
secretly.
Did he?
It felt so special.
Yeah. And then and then he arrives at Nanga Parbat base camp, and it just happens that Reinhold Messner is at Nanga Parbat base camp. So there was a sequence that Nims had filmed of him meeting Messner for the first time, which was an incredible kind of, Messner's such a big part of the story, and to have his validation for the project and his kind of open admiration for Nims, was really kind of a great thing for the project possible. I know Nims, it was a massive thing for him because he was getting a lot of criticism from other mountaineers at that time. And yeah, we had a scene in the film where we explained Messner's background, and Messner and Nims met, these two kind of giant figures of mountaineering. And that was a really nice scene. But again, at the time, I loved it in the film, and we took it out, and I hated it coming out of the film. But then, once you look back at it, it wasn't 100% necessary for the story. And, actually, with it coming out of the film and the film being tighter, the film was better for it.
Looking back, like you look back at your old projects, there's always something maybe could have been better. Is there something that has taught you through this project that maybe I could have done this better, or you've learned from the project in its entirety?
What could have been better? I think,
or maybe something new that you learned through 14 Peaks. It doesn't have to be an error. Maybe just something that you learned. I guess not.
I mean, for me, no. I mean, there's so many things. I mean, the thing I wish I'd done slightly differently was basically when we started the film, I was very keen not to have any interviews in Vision, because I wanted Nims to narrate the story and Nims's team to narrate the story, but there to always be the sense that they didn't survive. Because for people who don't know the story, I think if someone's describing something out of Vision, there's always a chance that they're describing something out of Vision because you're taking it from an interview that they've done in the past, but you're not showing them, visually. So they're not sat in an interview setting 2 years later telling you about their story. So I was very keen. So the interviews I did with Nims to begin with were audio interviews. Audio only, and then I interviewed, say, Don Bowie and Garrett Madison and Clara just as audio interviews, and then we obviously, with your help, we interviewed Mingma David and Lakpa and Geljan and Gessman as audio interviews. So that was the approach to begin with, and then as the kind of film evolved, it became more important that some of the interviewees were in Vision, just so you could connect with them as characters. You could, you get a lot of emotion. His brother especially, and you get, and Suchi especially as well. So you get a lot of emotion through the visual,
visually filming
an interview.
Like having him in the interview, it was such a surprising element. But when it came, it made it look special, because you see all the characters there, and he's there in his home, in his intimate space. It's very. It gives you a certain impression, like it connects with you very, like that's what I realized. If you had like 10 different interviews, that person would not make sense.
Yeah,
that is pretty clever.
Yeah, so I think so at the beginning, because I thought there's so much footage, there's so much other footage we can source, we could just have a whole film where you don't see any interviews at all. And there has been very successful recent documentaries like Maradona or Senna, for example, where you have that, and it's very effective. But I think for a story like this, where the characters were so important and the emotion was so important, it became more and more, over the course of the edit, we then refilmed some of the interviews to get them into the film. And that was just, I wish I'd kind of filmed them from the beginning and gone with that style from the beginning, because I think we could have filmed the interviews better. in more of a kind of consistent style, and part of that was the challenges of COVID and being able to travel. But yeah, I think the interviews could have been shot better and more consistent. But to be honest, it's a tiny thing in the bigger scheme of the film. Yeah.
As an audience, it barely matters. Like, the flow was amazing. Like, is this your first Netflix directed movie?
I mean, Bobby Robson was bought by Netflix, but that was an acquisition. Whereas this is a Netflix original. So in that sense, it's the first one. Yeah.
How does it feel?
Oh, it feels great. I mean, they're just for Nims and I, they're just the perfect partner for the film, because they have this incredible global reach. I think it fits very well within their kind of brand. And the fact that the film was released on the 29th of November at, I think it was midnight Pacific time US, and it was available in 180 plus countries at the same time. I had a friend that texted me that day who just watched it in New Zealand. It's that kind of universal coverage that just it's a perfect fit for this story, because the story is like, the story is about human endeavor. It's about pushing the human body to the very limit. And it's stories like stories about mountaineering and exploration. They have this universal appeal because anyone can connect to them, because they're these history making endeavors. I feel like everyone has this kind of collective ownership of these kind of stories because they're about humanity, and that's what Nims was pushing for. It doesn't matter that he's from Nepal. Will someone in France connect with him? Of course they will, because it's just an inspiring story. So that's why for us getting it on Netflix was just so important.
And I was like, as soon as it dropped, I tried to. Everyone was posting it all through the social media. The Nepalese were going crazy. Wow, something that has a Nepalese face on it is on Netflix. And I tried to tag you, but I found out that you don't use social media, and also people can't comment on Netflix either, because you can comment on YouTube, and I found very less interviews of you. So that means your work for you don't need a validation from anyone, like how it's done or anything. So how does it work for you? No social media, nothing. You're just there on the production Noah group. That's what I guess I tagged it or something. I saw it through Nims. So how does your personal life go without social media, and you're there on Netflix? You don't want anything. You don't want all of that.
No. I mean, it goes back to you just go back to why do you do it, and I think if you want to do it so that people praise you, and you get that kind of feedback, I just feel like it's the wrong priority in that sense. Because you've got to do it for the process. You've got to do it because you enjoy doing it. And the thing that I really enjoy is I really enjoy exploring a story. I really enjoy filming. I really enjoy the characters you meet. I really enjoy the edit process. That's the thing that I really enjoy doing it. Once the film comes out, obviously you want people to react to it in a good way, and you want people to enjoy it, but you've got to do it for yourself. You've got to do it because you're interested in the story, and you want to tell the story in that way, and you enjoy the process of telling the story.
How do you know how it's doing?
How do I? Well, my girlfriend's on social media, so she tells me.
There you go.
She tells me, and then and then obviously Nims will tell me as well how it's going for him. But I'm it's a big team effort in terms of Noah Media Group as well. Gabriel co-wrote it with me. The producers on the project, John, Barry, Drew, Katrine, all of them helped massively in terms of getting onto Netflix. Without them, it wouldn't be on Netflix, and without them, the project wouldn't even happen. From my perspective, I wouldn't be involved in it. So they're getting all of that great feedback as well. But yeah, for me, I think, throughout the timeline of making a film, you're spending 2 years on a film. The release is just the final part of that.
I think I'll ask a few just very ordinary questions. What would you suggest for someone like me? You know me, maybe briefly, but you know where I belong, where I'm from. You've been here, you've seen how everything is here. So what would you suggest for someone like me? Like, I've done my thing here in Nepal, and I'm seeking for opportunities that would challenge me. It's not that there aren't any here, but I want to test myself where I am internationally. So for someone who was born and raised in Nepal, how does one get into a scene like Netflix?
I think 14 Peaks just shows that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where the story. We're in an age now with the global streamers, where they are looking. There's so much demand for content that feels global, which you never had before. The only thing you ever had before that were the kind of big US blockbusters that you could sell to every country in the world. But we're now at an age where you can have a documentary based on a Nepali mountaineer that will be shown globally to a global audience, to 200 million viewers in 180 countries, and viewers, no matter their language, no matter where they're based, they'll connect with those stories. So I think there's never been a better opportunity to tell stories that previously, it would have been impossible to get them out to big audiences, to global audiences, because the opportunity wasn't there. Whereas now I think the streamers, Netflix leading it with Amazon, but Disney Plus, is going to be massive. Apple, obviously. Discovery Plus, Hulu, HBO Max. It's endless now. In terms of this drive for more content, and all the streamers are looking for global stories. And what they mean by that is they mean incredible stories, incredible characters, but that have these universal themes that people connect to. Be that human endeavor, be that family, be that grief or love or loss, these things that just make great, that make great stories. So I would say the opportunity for documentary has never been better, and it really just depends on what the story is you're trying to tell. So I think in terms of a Nepali story getting onto Netflix, 14 Peaks is going to be the first of many, I would suggest. And I know for a fact that, just through the conversations I've had with Nims's team that you've helped facilitate, their backstories are incredible. They are incredible characters as well. And that's just a sample size of 5 or 6 people, in terms of mountaineering in Nepal. So I would suggest that there are an incredible array of stories in Nepal that could be told, that will appeal.
Undiscovered, right? So I think
so much undiscovered.
I think this kind of content is what the world is looking for, something unheard. The stories,
something unheard, yeah. So it doesn't matter, and I think that's the overriding thing I've learned from this project is it doesn't matter where your story's based. It doesn't matter, how it doesn't matter what cameras you're filming it on. It doesn't matter if you've got a massive film crew or if you've just got one person doing it on their own. That's what NIMS has really shown. Is like, if you have the imagination, the ambition, the dedication, the courage to take it on, you can tell these stories from your bedroom. You can do them anywhere and people will connect with them, and it will get onto a global platform like Netflix if the story is extraordinary enough and if the characters are extraordinary enough.
Of course. All right, Torquil, as much as I want to talk to you, I think we've kept the cameramans really busy for a long time with all of the glitches on.
Yes.
Absolutely wonderful talking to you, and I'd like to thank Ceylon there and Anurag here for helping us shoot this thing. I would love to maybe some other time get in more depth with actual documentary filmmaking, because you'd be such an inspiration. Like the things that you learned from Gabriel has helped you. There's a lot of potential here in Nepal, and there aren't many inspirations to look up to and people to learn from. So maybe we could have another session where I could get questions from aspiring documentary filmmakers here. And maybe we could have some kind of session again.
I'd love to do it.
I so wanted to have a physical podcast with you, because I'm so sure that people in Nepal will absolutely love you. One, for the work you've done. Two, for the beautiful person you are, man. Thank you so much. Thank you for everything. Thank you for making such an incredible movie. Without even having spent months or years in Nepal, you understood what Nepal represents, what the Nepalese represent, and what NIMSDA is. Thank you again.
Mate, thank you so much. I've got to thank NIMS. He's the reason this film exists. I was just lucky enough to be brought on for the ride. I've got to thank his team as well. Ming McDavid, the guys, just absolute legends. Absolute legends. And yeah, thanks to the reaction it got in Nepal, to everyone, everyone was so welcoming, so generous, so friendly. So thanks to everyone, thanks to the crew, and thanks to you, for the footage you kindly helped film for the film, which made the film better, and for helping to get the voices of the Nepali team in the film was really important. So thank you to you as well.
You're always very humble. All right, Torquil, nice talking to you. This is actually a very new channel that I opened. This is actually my 4th channel here on YouTube, and we're doing podcasts, and I'm trying to learn from different variation of people. And for filmmaking, I'm trying to get onto the Nepalese people as well. But maybe you could help me get more information, people with more ideas. I could come up with more technical or creative questions. As for now, thank you so much again. I'm gonna virtually shake your hand. Thank you so much, brother. All right, see you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
All right,
cheers, Hisan. See you later.
Cheers. Thank you for everything, man.